So now it's really time to get our hands dirty, write some code, and learn some Dart and Flutter. For that here, I'm in a new project, but you can also stick to the existing project that you have, but you should make sure that in the lib folder, in this main Dart file, you delete all the content that's inside of it. So that main.dart is an empty file, because we're going to write this app, which we're building in this course section here, from the ground up, step by step, all from scratch, so that we can really dive into all these core Flutter and Dart features. So how do we start in this empty main.dart file? How do we give Flutter and Dart some instructions to show something on the screen? Well, it all starts with one key instruction that you must have in every Flutter app you're building. And that's the run app instruction, which is written like this: run app, and then followed by parentheses and a semicolon. This is a so-called function. And functions are a core concept in Dart and actually in many programming languages. Functions are simply instructions that can be executed in your code, and you will soon learn how you can write your own custom instructions, your own custom functions therefore as well. Now, run app is a function, an instruction that is provided by Flutter, so not written by you, not built into Dart, the programming language, but provided by the Flutter framework. And this instruction, as its name suggests, is all about getting that app up and running. Or to be more precise, its main job is actually to show some user interface on the screen. And that in the end is a vital task for any app you're building. Now, as you can see in this code editor, I'm getting an error here, though. I do have this red squiggly line here, which indicates an error, a problem with the code. And if you hover over such an error, you get a more detailed description of what's the problem here. In this case, that a function body must be provided. Now, what's that? Now, in Dart, it's actually not allowed to run functions like this, just like that in the main.dart file. Instead, you must wrap instructions like this, code like this, into other functions. And for that, we must create a custom function, a custom instruction. And that's done like this. You type void, and I'll explain what this void thing means soon, but you type void, followed by the name of your custom command, of your custom function, which in this case should be main. It must be main, and I'll explain why it must be main in a second as well. Followed by parentheses and then opening and closing curly braces. That's how you define a custom function, a custom instruction, if you want to call it like this, in Dart. This here, main, is the so-called function name. This here is the so-called return type, and I'll get back to what that is soon. And then this part here, between the opening and closing curly braces, is the so-called function body. The code that should be executed when this function is executed. And that's another core programming and Dart concept. Functions, as mentioned, are in the end instructions, and you can create your own instructions as you see here. But those instructions, those functions, are not executed by the mobile device, by the computer on which the code runs, unless you tell that device, that computer, to run that instruction. And you do tell a computer to execute an instruction by using that instruction's name, followed by opening and closing parentheses. So in the end, what we're doing here in line 6, here we are executing a function. We're calling a function, as it's also called. Now, I did mention that run app is a function provided by Flutter, so not written by you, but provided by the Flutter framework. And since Flutter is an open source project, you can actually inspect its code. And attached you find a link to a file that includes this run app function definition, which is exactly that function that we're trying to call in our code, so that we're trying to execute in our code. And only if you use code like this, you are actually executing a function. So this main function, for example, is at the moment only being defined, but it's never executed because we never have code where we would call main like this. If we would call it like this, if we would add this piece of code, we would execute this function. That's why I also like to call functions code on demand. You define them, And then, somewhere else in your code, you can use them as often as you want by calling them as I just explained it, by repeating that function name followed by opening and closing parentheses. And of course, it's not just you who can define functions, but also other developers, like the Flutter team did here with the runApp function they defined for us as part of the Flutter framework. And this runApp function must be executed, but as we saw in this error description, it must be executed inside of a function body, so we should actually move it into this main function body here, like this. In here, this function can now theoretically be executed, but now we're getting a new error. We're getting the error that the function runApp isn't defined. So in the end, Visual Studio Code is telling us that it understands that we want to execute a function called runApp, but it doesn't find this function anywhere. And where would it find it? In our code file, we only have the main function, nothing else. Where should runApp come from?